grocery list from 1975 priced out to $17.80 for 15 ordinary food lines. Milk, eggs, bread, coffee, meat, produce, the basics. I rebuilt that same cart for 2026, same quantities, and the total came to $75.72. Here's the strange part. A standard inflation calculator says it should be even higher. So aisle by aisle, we are going to find out which items stayed reasonable and which ones broke the receipt. Before we compare the receipts, here are the rules. The 1975 card is rebuilt from an official United States Census Bureau table, which cites Bureau of Labor Statistics retail food prices. I used the listed average prices and matched the quantities line by line. So 1 pound means 1 pound, 1 dozen means 1 dozen, and 1 loaf stays 1 loaf. For 2026, I used Bureau of Labor Statistics average price series by item. To avoid grabbing one weird month, I averaged January through June, then applied those averages to the same quantities from the 1975 list. There is one important limitation. Bureau of Labor Statistics food price methods changed before 1978, so this is not a perfect continuous data series where every method stayed identical for 50 years. It is a careful reconstruction using official sources, not a laboratory measurement. The question is simpler. If a shopper bought this exact ordinary cart then, what would the closest modern version cost now? Start with the plainest foods in the cart: bread, flour, and rice. In 1975, 2 pounds of white bread cost 72 cents. Using the same quantity in 2026, the price comes out to about $3.67. That is a real increase, but it is not the kind of explosion people often imagine when they talk about grocery inflation. Flour is even quieter. 5 pounds cost about $1 in 1975. In 2026, the same 5 pounds are about $2.74. Across more than 50 years, that is one of the smallest jumps in the whole cart. Rice is the calmest item here. 2 pounds were 82 cents in 1975. In 2026, they are about $2.14, which makes rice the smallest percentage increase on this list. So the starch subtotal gives us the first important clue. Grocery inflation is not one clean multiplier. Different shelves lived through different histories. Bread moved, flour barely stirred, and rice stayed surprisingly cheap. Then the cart reaches the meat counter and the whole comparison changes. The biggest shock on the 1975 list is 2 pounds of hamburger. Back then, the total was $1.76. Priced in 2026, the same 2 pounds come out to about $13.55. That is not just a higher number, it is the largest percentage increase on the entire grocery list. Bacon was already a premium item in 1975. 1 pound cost $1.76, the same as 2 pounds of hamburger. In 2026, that pound of bacon is about $6.80. Expensive then, expensive now, but it did not jump the way ground beef did. The whole chicken tells a different story. A 3-pound bird cost $1.90 in 1975. In 2026, it prices out around $6.11. That is still an increase, but compared with beef, chicken stayed much closer to the budget end of the case. This is where the modern grocery bill starts to separate from the old one. In 1975, hamburger was an everyday protein. By 2026, ground beef has moved into a higher price category, while chicken has become the meat that families lean on when they are trying to keep the total down. From meat, the list moves into the dairy case, where the headline item is eggs. A dozen grade A large eggs cost about 77 cents in 1975. In early 2026, the same dozen is around $2.33, though eggs are one of the most volatile items in the store. A bird flu outbreak, a supply shock, or a seasonal swing can move that number fast. Whole milk is steadier. 1 gallon was $1.57 in 1975. In 2026, it is about $4.14. That is a noticeable increase, but on this list, milk is actually one of the calmer long-term movers. Butter lands closer to the middle of the story. A pound was about $1.03 in 1975. By 2026, it is around $4.15, higher but not the wildest jump in the case. The surprise is processed American cheese. In 1975, a package was about 77 cents, roughly in the same neighborhood as a dozen eggs. In 2026, it is about $4.70. Eggs get the news coverage because the spikes are sudden. Cheese wins the long game because the rise is bigger and quieter. Outside the dairy case, the basket starts splitting in 4 directions. Bananas are the calmest item on the list. In 1975, 3 pounds cost about 70 cents. In 2026, the same 3 pounds are about $1.95. That is higher, but compared with almost everything else in the cart, bananas are still the cheap line. They are one of the few foods where the modern price still feels recognizable at the register. Potatoes tell a different story because the dollar amount looks harmless. 5 pounds were about 67 cents in 1975. In 2026, that bag is around $4.38. It is only a few dollars more in absolute terms, but percentage-wise, potatoes have moved hard. Tomatoes sit in the messy middle. 2 pounds were about $1.16 in 1975. In 2026, the comparable price is about $4.43. I am using a 6-month average here because tomatoes swing with season, region, weather, and shipping. A single week can make them look cheaper or more expensive than the real trend. Then the pantry gives the sharpest contrast. Sugar rises, but not dramatically by this basket's standards. Coffee does the opposite. A can or comparable amount was about $1.33 in 1975. In 2026, it is around $9.52. On this entire list, only ground beef beats coffee for the biggest jump. When every item is added up, the 1975 grocery list comes to $17.80. Priced in 2026, the same fixed basket comes to $75.72. That is not a small drift. It is about a 325% increase, or roughly 4.25 times higher at the register. This is the number you get when you force the modern store to answer a very specific question. What would these same 15 quantities cost today? But this is also where the story gets interesting. Because if you put $17.80 from 1975 into a standard all items consumer price index calculator, it does not give you $75.72. It gives you about $109.37 in 2026 money. If you use the Food at Home Consumer Price Index instead, the answer is closer, but still higher than this basket. That version gives about $92.16. So why does the calculator say more? It is not because the Consumer Price Index is wrong, and it is not because this grocery list is wrong. They are measuring different things. The Consumer Price Index is built from broad categories, thousands of prices, and spending weights that change with how households actually spend money. It includes substitutions, category mixes, and products that did not exist in the same form in 1975. My basket does none of that. It freezes 15 items in place and asks what happens if you buy those exact quantities again. That fixed basket approach is useful because it is easy to see. Ground beef, coffee, potatoes, milk, sugar, bananas, bread, and the rest all land in the same cart. But it is also narrow. A real household changes brands, package sizes, recipes, stores, and habits when prices move. Now add wages. In 1975, this $17.80 basket took about 3 hours and 46 minutes of work at average hourly earnings. In 2026, the $75.72 basket takes about 2 hours and 21 minutes. That does not mean groceries feel easy today. Average wages hide huge differences by job, region, family size, rent, debt, taxes, and benefits. But for this exact basket, measured against average hourly pay, the time cost is lower now than it was in 1975. That old receipt proves 3 things. The basket jumped from $17.80 to $75.72. Ground beef and coffee did the most damage. while rice, milk, sugar, flour, and bananas held it down. Prices rose sharply, but foods moved differently, and wages changed affordability. Thanks for watching. Comment with the receipt I should price next, and subscribe for the next then and now comparison.